Sport is huge. It's a national obsession. It's big business. It brings fame, power, glamour and money to elite players. And increasingly, our professional sports stars are Māori and Pacific Islanders. Sport, particularly our national game of rugby, has always been important to New Zealand's identity. Rugby was religion, a level playing field, the meeting place for all sectors of our society. Sport has the power to influence our race relations and our sense of nationhood.
I don't think there is a single other factor that has been so important than the browning of New Zealand sport in terms of generating better relationships, broader relationships, deeper relationships, better understanding of where the other guy comes from. Sport is the only way, really.
In my opinion, sport, particularly professional sport, single-handedly in this country's history has broken down more racial barriers than anything else put together. Music, Waitangi Tribunal, you name it. The power of sport in the modern 21st century is where it's at.
And there's a common perception that our major professional sports teams are becoming increasingly brown.
I'm looking forward to the day where I see 15 Māori in the all-black jersey, and that day's coming. I mean, white is a minority culture in rugby.
There could come a time when there's no white men in the team at all.
In our major professional sports codes, New Zealand is increasingly represented on the world stage by brown faces. In 2003, Māori and Pacific Island players made up 19 of the 28 players in the Rugby World Cup team, 17 of the 23 players in the Women's World Champion Rugby team, 22 of the 27 Warriors, and the entire Kiwi Rugby League team, which beat Australia. But is this just due to the browning of the population? Well, while it's true that Māori and Pacific Island population numbers are increasing, at the last census they made a combined total of around 21% of the New Zealand population. So clearly they're overrepresented in our major sporting codes. We're going to explore the complex reasons why. Is it nurture or is it nature?
We have very big bone structures and higher density of bone. We carry the largest amounts of muscle tissue for any race group in the world.
Kahununu Baron Afiaki is a lawyer and sports agent, currently researching a PhD about Pacific Island physique and sport. He cites an 11-year study by Dunedin professor Phil Horton, which found that Pacific Islanders are the biggest people in the world.
The Polynesian peoples were ocean-going peoples, and contrary to popular belief, the Pacific Ocean at night time will freeze you to death. You will die of hypothermia if you don't have the necessary protections. And because Polynesians didn't have high-tech thermal protections, smaller people died literally on a weekly, monthly basis during the open ocean voyages. So the bigger people survived.
And those conditions also promoted a particular kind of muscle development.
When you get cold, you shiver. And that's your fast-twitch muscle fibre shivering. The theory is that when you're regularly cold, the levels of fast-twitch muscle fibre had to evolve a lot faster. So the modern Polynesian therefore has predominantly high levels of fast-twitch muscle fibre. So you combine big body structure with heavy muscle tissue, and then you add fast-twitch muscle to it, that is speed, you get the perfect formula for 21st century sport.
Many are convinced that it's not just genetics, but also diet that makes Polynesians the biggest people in the world.
Oh, I think it's Peter Wharialofa's corned beef ads, mate. You know, he's sort of been out there, you know, drumming them, you know, pushing for their palm corned beef.
They're not brought up in yuppie families. They're not scared to have a decent feed of steak for breakfast, steak for lunch or steak for tea. Throw in a bit of Povey Masima, and mate, doesn't do any harm, you know. That's what makes them the body, the strength they've got.
There's a joke that goes around about the taro and the corned beef, and that's got to do, but it's done no wonders for myself.
The taro thing is a myth. If anything, If there's a single food that the Polynesians do consume that may correlate to size, it is actually the giant yam. This is the giant yam, known more popularly in the Pacific Islands as ufi, UFI, which has very high levels of naturally occurring steroid. And in Tonga particularly, it's known as food of the kings. This is fed to babies in a mashed form from the day they're born, and the highest consumers, Tongans. Now, I believe there's a direct correlation between their size and the high levels of consumption of this. 100% Pacific power.
It's been suggested that the size of young Polynesian players has accelerated the browning of rugby and rugby league. Parents of smaller Pākehā kids prefer non-contact sports such as soccer, which has seen massive growth in the past 20 years. Meanwhile, in Auckland, 70% of the 19,000 registered rugby players are Polynesian.
I suppose the difficulty people have is how do we enable everybody to play and come through to the top without being put off the game by some physical size. But the Islanders, Pacific Islanders, the Māori certainly have that advantage, particularly at a younger age.
We mature a lot earlier than white kids. I mean, you know, white kids, you know, they mature around 14 or 15 years old, and then they start to fill out, you know. Those brown balls, you know, their balls are dropping at 8.
But, you know, you get to about 19, 20, it don't matter anymore. You know, it's all about being technically right, tactically right, that type of thing. So it's a bit sad that by probably around about 14, 15, a lot of the other nationalities are giving it away.
The Rugby Union has introduced weight-based grades to counter this problem, but the Pākehā exodus to soccer continues. So if nature contributes to Māori and Pacific Island sporting success, what about nurture? Māori and Pacific Island players aren't known just for their size and speed, but for how they play the game. Fun, flamboyance and flair can't be measured, but sports commentators are in general agreement it's part of the brown factor.
If you ever go to any of the Polynesian countries, they just have a lovely laid-back attitude to life and a more relaxed way of living. Perhaps it's got something to do with that. Perhaps it's something they're inbred with. You know, they're taught to have fun while they play.
I think it just happens. I think for a lot of players, they try and make it happen, and that's where they sort of tend to get stuck. And I think for a lot of the brown boys, I think they just let it happen, and they've grown up with it, I think. Whether they used to be on the marae, I think it's a bit of cheekiness as well, you know, growing up. You know, being on the marae, I suppose for some cheeky little Maori boy back in the day, being cheeky, chucking all these little passes and playing touch on the marae there. I think that's what it is. I think, you know, it's sort of growing up in you.
I think it's just how you're feeling. You know, I get a lot of people, you know, asking me, you know, how do you step like that? You know, how do you do that side step? You know, for me, I can't explain it because it's just something that I do, you know, instinctively, and you know, it's how I feel at the time.
Yeah, when you go to other nationalities, Māori have been known for flair, and I guess it goes back many, many years when the game was really tight, that it had to be fought up front, and there was a demand for that style, so consequently the score was about 6-3. Māori weren't 6-3, you know, many years ago the scores were always 30, 40, that type of thing. And surprise, surprise, we get to the Super 12, they say the fans want to see a lot of tries scored. So then all of a sudden, instead of the Māori being viewed as being quite an indisciplined chap, this is really what the fans want. So commercially, that's been captured. And that's what flair's all about. It's giving people the opportunity to just go out there, free will, instinctive, and express yourself.
Flair's a real overused word, isn't it? Flair's used when somebody does something like the no-look pass. And see, that's how good I am. I didn't even look the other way. But then again, you know, then flair gets slagged when the no-look pass doesn't work.
Māoris would rather look good losing than look bad winning, you know, and that pretty much sums us up. I mean, no one wants to, you know, oh, we won the game 6-3. You know, we'd rather say we lost the game 41-42, and what a hell of a game, and then blame the ref and beat him up.
When the English arrived in Aotearoa, bringing all sorts of new rules and new games, Māori were quick to embrace rugby.
It was physically appealing for us. It was a game in those times that anyone could play, of any socio-economic groups, so they got into the game. Māori suffered terribly during those times in terms of racial discrimination against us, in terms of our language, in terms of our culture, and there weren't many avenues where we were able to express ourselves, but the rugby field was one of them.
Māori already had the physical skills for the new sport. They traditionally used a variety of games and activities to develop the hand-eye coordination needed for hand-to-hand combat.
The play break is an opportunity for their favourite game, an old Māori one, a sort of follow the leader in hand and arm movements.
Team sports like rugby had natural appeal to a communal culture.
We often grow up in communal sort of living arrangements, I suppose, with lots of cousins and lots of brothers and sisters, so we enjoy interacting in larger groups.
We're a warrior type people, and very rarely did warriors go out there and fight by themselves. And, they kept together in groups, and they fought battles in large numbers.
From very early on, Māori were influential in the development of New Zealand rugby. In 1888, the first ever tour to Britain by a New Zealand sports team was devised as a business venture by a Māori player, Joe Warbrick, who saw the marketing potential of a Māori brand. 21 of the 26 players were Māori, and the team, called the New Zealand Natives, introduced the haka as a pre-game tradition. One of the team, Thomas Rangiwahia Allison, went on to become the first Māori lawyer, wrote one of the first coaching books about rugby, proposed the black jersey and silver fern as the national uniform, and helped form the New Zealand Rugby Union. The next tour to Britain, in 1905, was organised by the Rugby Union. There was only one Māori player, Billy Steed from Invercargill. He also wrote a book on the art of rugby, but Māori representation in New Zealand teams remained low for most of the rest of the 20th century. It wasn't until the 1990s that Māori and Pacific Island players started appearing in significant numbers.
He's got the bounce. He's handed off his opposite. Lamu.
This was the new age of professionalism, and many believe that it's had a big role to play in the browning of rugby and rugby league.
The Pacific Islanders and the Māoris get seen quite early, and they may be put onto the gravy train, so to speak, at an early age.
The potential was demonstrated most spectacularly by the meteoric financial success of Jonah Lomu. Seemingly overnight, a kid from South Auckland became a millionaire, and Jonah showed that sport really was a ticket to fame and fortune.
For a lot of Māori and PIs, it's almost a way out. It's becoming an opportunity for them to actually stake out a career in sport, and that was never the case before. So now we've got 16, 17-year-olds being spotted by agents, and so what it offers for a lot of our kids is an opportunity to make a big salary, to actually have a really good professional career.
All of a sudden you're getting money to play the game, you know, and I think for a lot of us right at the beginning, if you were young and you're getting this amount of money, all of a sudden, you know, it was just like, whoa.
By 2001, 13 of the 44-strong All Black squad were Māori. Pacific Islanders made up another 7, and they're increasing in representation even faster than Māori.
Today, not even waves of Scottish defence could stop him. Absolute power and pace.
The Pacific Island influence on New Zealand rugby had its origins in the 1960s, when large numbers began emigrating. They changed the face of New Zealand society, but they didn't always feel welcome.
You know, things are pretty tough. A lot of the PI people really been fingered out as overstayers, and if there's any trouble, it was really, you know, if it wasn't the Maoris, it was the Islanders, so, you know, we're in a pretty no-win situation.
That was until they started jumping onto the rugby fields.
Radiolopa stretches out and scores it by the post. Number 1, Peter Radiolopa.
I was fortunate that rugby was a doorway to probably better lifestyle, in the sense of people really accepting me for as me as being a Samoan because of my rugby instead of me trying to be a Kiwi and not acknowledging my heritage.
When my parents came to New Zealand and us children were born and were growing up, we were trying to become Kiwis rather than trying to be Samoan or Rarotongan, which is my heritage. And as a result of that, from my perspective, I never actually learnt either language, the languages of my parents. And I'm a bit sad about that, but I've gained acceptance in this society by becoming an All Black, which I guess is compensation, I suppose.
Brian Williams going backwards, looking for space, and through and getting it. Great try, Brian Williams.
Sports has helped facilitate that process of connection and sense of belonging and sense of value, and being celebrated as part of this wonderful fabric and tapestry of our contemporary society now.
When Tana Umanga became the first Pacific Island All Black captain, the Human Rights Commission hailed it as an achievement for New Zealand race relations. So over the years, the rugby field has become a meeting place for different cultures living in New Zealand.
Look, some of my best mates are PI boys, but I mean, we don't think ourselves of as Samoans or Europeans or Pākehās, whatever. We just think of ourselves as New Zealanders. We embrace our cultural heritage, if you like, but you know, the sort of ethnic backgrounds don't come into it when you're together. You're just mates who played footy together, who've got a lot in common.
The unity and integration which has been fostered on the rugby field is now being matched by a desire to recognise ethnic diversity through race-based sports awards and teams. So how does separate Māori and Pacific Island sports development affect our notions of what it means to be a New Zealander? If sport has been instrumental in integrating different sectors of the New Zealand community, it's also used to celebrate cultural diversity. For over a decade, the annual Māori Sports Awards have honoured players as Māori rather than simply as New Zealanders.
And the winner of the Senior Māori Sportswoman of the Year is Temepara Clark.
Māori is definitely part of me, and it's just really neat to be amongst all these Māoris who's passionate about sport. I think every ethnic race should have them, you know, they identify who their top sports people are, for obviously role models and things like that.
It was very much linked to, you know, our identity as a people, and the fact that sport is something that in our communities we all play and participate in, and it's a huge status in our community. So we just wanted a specific opportunity and avenue to come together. We like getting together.
It reminds them of their culture, their heritage, and their whakahihi, their pride.
Sportsperson 2002, and that goes to Beatrice Whaomoina.
The New Zealand Samoan community has also established a separate award ceremony for their sports achievers.
I went to the Samoan Sports Awards. Yeah, they were brilliant. I've also been to the Māori Sports Awards. I've been to the Pākehās or the New Zealand, the Halbergs. So, you know, why not have those sort of things? And, you know, I just get really annoyed when people say, well, it's being separatist. It isn't being separatist. We as a people want to celebrate those things.
More controversial than race-based sports awards are race-based sports teams, such as the New Zealand Māori rugby team.
We have a lot of debate on Radio Sport about that kind of stuff. I mean, it always raises debate, and you just polarise people completely. You know, just beyond people that can't accept it, or that then try and use that argument, you know, an argument about Waitangi, or an argument about land rights or seabeds, or an argument about, you know, funding and stuff. How can you drag that in? To me, it's not even in the same, you know, it's not even in the same department store. We've had a New Zealand Māori rugby team for the best part of 100 years. So that to me is part of history. And so why would you not want that to continue? I've never seen it as a separatist thing. This is a New Zealand team representative of, you know, part of New Zealand. And as a New Zealander, I think go hard.
The New Zealand Māori rugby team has been around since 1910. They've played every major rugby nation and beaten most of them at some time or another. Despite the challenges securing players and tours in this professional era, the New Zealand Māori team has survived.
About 10 years ago, there was a huge challenge. I mean, players thought they came to our team and it was just about rugby. And it took a bit of time for them to really understand we're not just another Saturday team. You know, we're the Māori team. In a lot of cases, we have to allow a lot of them to actually find their roots. Now, the way to come into our team, of course, is whakapapa. So, taha Māori, going on to marae, pōhiri, waiata, kapahaka, they're all part of the environment. Now today, we have a lot of high-profile players, icons like Cullen, who spent 4 years waiting to put on the Māori jersey. His whakapapa quite clearly states that he's Māori. So on that side, we've got a lot of fair people now starting to turn up in the game. And why? Because they're proud, even though they might only have that much Māori in them. Now, 10 years ago, that never used to happen. We had high-profile players that never turned up. They would be named in the team, Prince of Wales team, and they never turned up.
It has its own sort of feeling to the team. It's, you know, we talk about being a whānau and immediately the new guys, and for some guys that have returned, you sort of get that feeling straight away. There's no one sort of left out on their own, or no one made to feel unwelcome.
And here you sort of realise your roots and understand a lot more about New Zealand culture, and it's quite cool when you go overseas and talking to different people from different countries, and they've got what we've got over here. You know, it's quite unique.
According to Matt Tupou, his team reflects changing attitudes in New Zealand society, with more players now keen to identify as Māori and be part of the New Zealand Māori team.
You know, when you're in a Māori side, you're going to have fun because of the style of players that are there. You know, and when you sort of get all these players with this tremendous talent to try and get into a sort of a game pattern, you know you're going to have fun and exciting times. So not only on the field but off the field as well. You know, these guys can relax. You know, you can go in there and chill out and have a good time.
The New Zealand Māori rugby team is a national team, but it cannot compete at World Cup tournaments due to the one nation, one team rule. So should Māori teams be allowed to compete in World Cup tournaments? Can one country send two teams?
Why not? The home unions do it in the UK. You know, the England, Wales, Scotland and Ireland. They send for yet they're one people, the United Kingdom. Why can't we as New Zealand send two teams?
It's an opportunity to show our ability back to our youth by promoting them at those world tournaments. Now, there's plenty of room for both.
I'm not so sure about that myself. That's my own personal perspective. You know, I tend to think that one country, one team.
I don't agree with the idea of playing a New Zealand Māori side at the Rugby League Cup, even though I like the idea of a New Zealand Māori Rugby League side, because to me a world tournament means, you know, surely every country can only be represented once. So I'm not quite with that.
I don't know if we'll ever see a Māori team play at the World Cup. My focus has always been to try and get 15 Māoris into the All Black jersey to play in the test. That's always been my focus. I see with the advent of the Team Pacifica, well, I start scratching my head. I see that they're taking another step. And maybe it would be good to have a Māori team at the World Cup. You know, one thing I do know about the Māori team, if they were to go to the World Cup, on what I've seen over the last 3 anyway, that the majority of those teams that we could take.
When the Māori league team put a team in the World Cup, man, my honkies got so upset. Why? I mean, New Zealand Rugby League wasn't going to pick these guys. So, you know, they just want to play the game, you know, and they certainly weren't making up the numbers. You know, why are people so jealous? Why are people so quick to say, oh, well, you know, that's separatist, that's racist? No, it's not. You know, New Zealand's already got a team. Well, they're not representing New Zealand, they're representing Māoridom, and that's got to be a good thing, doesn't it?
In fact, a precedent has been set for New Zealand fielding two teams at a World Cup event. New Zealand Rugby League sent two teams to the 2000 Rugby League World Cup, the Kiwis and a Māori squad called New Zealand Aotearoa. The Māori team was championed by former NZRL board member John Tamihere.
They accepted that we had been strong stakeholders in the code, that we were growing in strength, and secondly, we weren't separatists. We gave the Kiwis first choice, because I don't mind how many Māori boys get on the world stage. It's a matter of how many we can get up. How we get them up is the interesting issue. So the Kiwis were always going to have first choice. We were always going to be a significant development division, but we needed greater exposure. And they accepted the argument that if we can get 2 teams up, and that the A team is the Kiwi team, but the Māori side will always be competitive and breed a lot more out of the stud, because that's all it is. You know, rugby league and rugby just look for stud farms. And Māori and Polynesian boys, because of their genetic makeup, are part of that stud farm, and that's just the way it is.
Of course a Māori team should go to the World Rugby League Cup, because it's about development on a world scale for rugby league. But in rugby, development is 100 times more than rugby league. And the reality is that the All Blacks is the #1 side, and we should try and make that team. And I don't believe that there is I don't believe there's 2 countries in New Zealand.
Oh, well, he's got some problems, and I'd recommend he go to a psychiatrist. But, you know, you can't have a split personality like that, you know. If you're going to support a Māori side into a World Cup in rugby league, I see no variation in netball, no variation in rugby, so long as we uphold the mana of our people and are competitive.
However, with the New Zealand team getting the first pick of players, can a Māori team be truly competitive?
Yeah, well, had we beaten and got through to the quarterfinals, we might have had a remote chance of playing the New Zealand side. But hey, we all knew, there's if New Zealand had the first choice, or the New Zealand Māori had the first choice of picking their players, well, I reckon we'd have a pretty strong team, you know, if we did. But hey, we knew the New Zealand Rugby League had the first option to picking Māori players, and that was fair enough.
Māori teams continue to grow in strength and profile, but most accept that the All Blacks and Kiwi squads should get first pick of Māori players. But will recent developments in Pacific rugby affect the availability of Pacific Island players for the All Blacks? Rugby is the #1 sport in the Pacific Islands, but for many years the only way for young Pacific Island players to make their mark on the world stage was to go to Australia or New Zealand. New Zealand scouts made regular trips to the islands looking for young rugby talent, bringing back the best schoolboy players to top rugby playing schools in New Zealand. While this exodus of talent to bigger unions is good for individual players, it weakens the development of Pacific Island teams.
A lot of those players that we probably need to develop in the islands actually move off island pretty early on in their careers. I mean, as early as secondary schools, there's scholarships being provided for them to travel overseas, play their rugby in, for example, New Zealand, and then pretty much you lose those players to those systems. And I mean, you can't blame the young 15, 16, 17-year-old if there is a viable pathway for them, which can also provide financial security not only for themselves, but obviously for their families.
From a couple of Welshmen.
Despite losing many of their best young players, Samoa was still doing well in international rugby until the advent of professionalism took them out of play.
We had a great Manu Samoa effort at the World Cup of '91. We played in competitions like the Super 10 and the South Pacific. And then lo and behold, you know, when the game went professional in 1995 and Sanzar was born in the Tri-Nations, suddenly these people said, well, you know, you were part of it before, but we don't want you now. There's money and there's you've got good players and we want your players. So suddenly people were saying, well, you know, you're excluded. Hard luck. What are you going to do about it?
In January 2000, the IRB ruled that a player may only play for one national team in his entire rugby career. They introduced the rule to maintain the integrity of the international game. But this creates difficult decisions for promising Pacific Island players. If they're chasing the All Black dream, they cannot play for the team of their Pacific heritage.
Yeah, I was divided. I definitely wanted to play for the All Blacks, no doubt about it, but my dad has a strong history with playing for Tonga, and therefore my heart was always for Tonga as well. And I was very close in '95, once I left school, to go and play for Tonga in the World Cup. The decision was kind of, you know, had to be made. And at the time, I was in the New Zealand Rugby Academy, and I spoke to a few important people, and they told me that it was better off that I'd just hang on and get development in my game before I shot out international, and I took their advice. So.
It's a high-stakes gamble for young players who risk missing the opportunity of representing any national team.
If my opportunities don't, come about in New Zealand, then, most definitely I'll have a look and, try and go back and if I can, make the Samoan team.
In the future, Pacific Island players may also have to choose between a lucrative Super 12 contract and the opportunity to play for a Pacific Island national team. The NZRU is charged with strengthening New Zealand rugby and has signalled a strong preference to have All Black eligible players filling as many Super 12 contracts as possible.
There's even talk now that NPC rugby would require provision that if you want to play for Auckland or Wellington, then you need to, the scout really looking at the option of playing for Samoa, Tonga, Fiji. So that is a dilemma for those who are involved in Pacific Island rugby, because in the past those have been very viable pathways, and there's been enough flexibility to allow a young Tongan or Samoan or Fijian boy to maybe play for Auckland and still play for a Pacific Island, one of the Pacific Island nations, but I think that'll be a thing of the past.
I watched the so-called World Cup and really saw a top 5 tournament with lots of teams who could have threatened to take the World Cup even, unfairly dealt to. And I'm really particularly focusing on Fiji, Samoa and Tonga. Polynesian countries with lots of physical ability, and yet the playing field itself was uneven. And what I mean by that is that between this Fiji, Samoan and Tongan team, at least 30 players were made unavailable. Now, the irony of the difficulty I have is every single player I understand selected for the All Blacks, England, South Africa, France, Wales, Scotland, Italy, were released by their clubs. And yet all these other players are not released. So what I say to Kiwis is, how would you feel if your top 12 first selection to the All Blacks were not available? You'd feel outraged, I think. Well, that's the feeling that the Polynesians have about their teams. Where is the integrity of the World Cup? It's not a World Cup, it's a tournament.
The reality is that rugby is now big business, and the Pacific Island nations are thought to be too small to play with the big boys.
Obviously, in a commercial world where bums on seats, etc., are the bottom line and success, etc., we can understand the thinking, but I think the Pacific Islands deserve better. I think there is a moral obligation for us as New Zealanders towards our little brothers.
I guess my challenge is to the administrators of New Zealand, Australia, South Africa and the IRB. Don't exclude the Pacific Islanders. They're a great part of rugby in this part of the world. And the Olympic principle is to include everyone and let people have a go. And you're excluding a very meaningful part of rugby. Don't do it.
One strategy to include the Pacific Islands in international rugby is the recently formed Pacific Islanders team, combining Fiji, Tonga and Samoa. Playing for the squad does not affect eligibility for any national team, but will 3 outings a season provide development opportunities for Pacific Island rugby?
It's probably the only option available to us at this point, so that if we don't make use of it, that will count against us.
The recently expanded Super 14 competition still has no room for a Pacific Island team, despite calls that this is exactly what's needed.
Would immediately expose them to better income opportunities. And once you've got the income coming in, you're then able to attract and hold on to your players. And if you're able to create a meaningful, professional environment where players train and prepare properly, and have lots of international competition, then you're going to become extremely competitive. You'd have world beaters, I'll tell you right now.
The future of Pacific Island rugby is a complex game in progress. and it illustrates that professional sport is where big business and notions of nationhood collide. We've been discussing the brown factor in professional sport, but is the browning on the field being matched by any browning off the field?
We need to move from the field into the boardrooms, because decision making is what we've got to participate in. It's no good just being the runner on the field. Many years ago, you used to see there's the white supervisor and there's the 14 workers at the coalface. Have a look at Māori. And at the moment, even around Auckland, you see a lot of the Islanders. They're actually at the coalface. So you've got to change that around, and I think the sport is just one way of doing it.
Get involved in the management side, because we're sadly lacking in those areas, and too many of our kids are being exploited by some of the sharks out there.
Well, they haven't risen to administrative positions. It's hard to rise to them if you're not welcome there.
It's a hard subject to get around when you consider the hierarchies, the coaches, the management, the administration. They're all white faces, and they're continuing to be white faces. And, we've seen Mac McCallion, and we've seen Kiwi Sarank, and we've seen a couple kind of wriggle their way through in terms of the coaching. But Colin Cooper aside, how many of the Super 12 coaches are Māori coaches? So, what, are you allowed to play, but you're not allowed to run the game? I mean, how does that work?
The people who do run the game are happy to promote the brown factor when marketing their product. When the Warriors Rugby League team was launched, it was clearly branded as a Pacific Island and Māori franchise.
The face with the tongue sticking out and everything else, that's the challenge, that's the whittle for everyone out there. So, a very, very good piece of marketing from the Warriors.
The marketing of the Warriors is a classic example, of how to market brown football. I mean, every ad is just big smash. It's either someone getting smashed, a colourful way of scoring a try, or and just guys cutting back lines to ribbons. I mean, basically their ads sum up, Pacific Island and Māori football, man, free flowing and hard.
To international audiences, sport is helping to rebrand New Zealand as a Pacific nation, and this point of difference helps bring in the crowds. Jonah Lomu became an international superstar after his performance at the 1995 World Cup.
There couldn't be anything more positive that could have happened to that sport. And there would not have been a white guy that would have done that. I mean, would it have looked as spectacular if that had been, John Kirwan doing it? No, it wouldn't have been. It was the fact that it was this big black bus doing it. Especially to the, up their nose, bib and tucker, toffee nose, buddy, mum's knickers on head poms. Made it even better, didn't it? And the whole world erupted.
You look at the rugby world in Europe, besotted with the big brown powerhouses that come out. The average English person just, is their imaginations are totally awestruck by these many beautiful, big, powerful brown sport machines. It's a very charming, attractive package.
We're happy to celebrate the individual achievement of Polynesian stars and to use Māori and Pacific Island imagery to promote our league team. But we've had to work hard on embracing our ethnic diversity. We expressed nationhood through our pre-match anthem, but in 1999, New Zealand wasn't quite ready to be represented in the Māori language.
I was absolutely so disappointed that nobody could sing the national anthem.
Should have been sung in English.
For years we've sung the national anthem in English, no Māori verse. And suddenly, just once, early Sunday morning, amidst the brilliant drama and the tension of Twickenham, as the nation watched with pride, Hine Wehe Mohi stood in front of the rugby world and sang our anthem in Māori, no English. And there's an outcry.
And I thought that it would be great to celebrate ourselves and all our uniqueness, because here we were in the motherland, and I wanted to show that we are very special and different and not just a colony in the South Pacific.
For the next game, Hinewehi was made to sing the anthem entirely in English, and the All Blacks lost.
I kind of felt like we were going way backwards in time if we were accepting of the haka, which is absolutely, unashamedly Māori and representative of this country in every single way. The lyrics, the form, the dance form, and the intensity of it. So it seemed very hypocritical to me that there should be such a fuss and concern for the anthem being sung only in Māori.
How can you be a proud New Zealander and not know the national anthem in Māori? You know, there have been collaborations between the Māori Language Commission and Human Rights Commission and Te Puni Kōkiri, and they hand out anthem cards, but you know, people at the end of the day have to want to participate and show that they, you know, acknowledge that Te Reo Māori is part of this country.
A few years later, and it would be surprising to hear our anthem sung only in English. And that's a sporting achievement of sorts.
I think people are now accustomed to, for instance, the Maori version of the national anthem whenever a national sports team runs on the field. It's just grown, it's just part of what we are.
We're a country that's got great ethnic diversity, and I think that's one of the beauties of the country. Now, you know, we've still got some sort of ties to the Commonwealth, but it's almost removed. You know, we're sort of forging ahead with our own identity, and I think that's neat. And sport's been a great conduit that's assisted that.
So we're dealing with a modern phenomenon called sport, which is getting so powerful in terms of humanity. It will put its roots into economics, politics, and social mobility all at once. What we're seeing in terms of browning of New Zealand is a changing of our self-image.
We are a Pacific nation. I mean, you know, look at where we are. You know, geographically, we're slap bang right in the middle of the Pacific. And, you know, maybe this is the easiest way for a lot of people to actually embrace that. You know, for a lot of people, it just seems, you know, easier to say we are one country when we all get together and play sport, as opposed to other aspects of our culture and our society and our life where, for some reasons, we don't perhaps want to be one country, or some people don't. Or you aren't as prepared to integrate all of those aspects. But when it comes to charging up the field with a ball in hand and a black jersey on your back, be it league or rugby or whatever, it seems to be all-encompassing and welcoming.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.